Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. Can you hear me? You can hear me. Fabulous. Okay, well, hopefully you're all watered and back in your seats comfortably. I'm Paul Frampton. I was the CEO of the media group of the Havas group until November last year. So have just exited a large media group and have an interesting perspective on what may be an existential crisis for media agencies right now in terms of what's happening. The theme of this next discussion, which will last for about an hour and 15, is what does the future media mix look like, which I think is possibly one of the most interesting times to have this discussion. We've obviously just heard from Americo and from Simon talking about the fact that the channels may have changed, but often the job of building a brand or storytelling has not changed. So I think we'll have an interesting discussion around how much of things changed and how a 21st century brand's built versus how they may have been built in the past. Broadcast, i.e. television and out of home, and direct marketing 10 years ago dominated all of the media spend. The iPhone only launched amazingly 10 years ago last summer, which is probably quite an astonishing fact to recall. Today, mobile ad spend grows faster than any other channel. And today we see digital and TV or audio-visual, whether that be on a linear TV screen or on a device where audio-visual is served through the internet, we see those two channels dominating spend. So you could argue that actually everything's changed but nothing's changed, because you've gone from audio-visual and things that drive response, direct marketing, through to audio-visual and the web digital that drives response. But the makeup of those channels and the makeup of the players, and we've seen the Amazons, the Google and the Facebooks dominating the kind of top brand list that Brand Finance kind of published this morning, we've seen that those guys have jumped up. So the players involved are radically different to they would have been 10 years ago. When you were looking at ad spend, you would have looked at ITV very much at the top of the tree in the UK about 10 years ago. We're also at a place where advertising is less trusted than it's ever been. At the Ad Association event last week, it's actually dropped to a third of people in the UK actually say they trust advertising. So that is an existential crisis for sure. And whilst ad spend in 2017 grew better than expected, around 2.5–3%, the projections for this year could be as low as 0.5%, possibly the highest might be 2%. But actually marketing spend, and we've heard some of the marketeers talk about investment in experiences, in MarTech like Salesforce, or in kind of data-driven programs or social marketing. Marketing spend is actually up closer to double-digit figures. So advertising spend, and paid media and advertising obviously go hand in hand, is actually starting to decrease. And obviously most agencies that were created to manage media were built with paid media as the main focus. So we're starting to see a different view on channels, a view of how do I build my own channels? How do I build my own channels? And Americo talked a lot about that, and how you build advocacy through your customers. And also how do you build partnerships? We've just heard Simon talk about Aston Martin and getting into different adjacent sectors that do a brand job and a media job. They reach eyeballs as well as they actually create business value. More searches and news consumption happens on a mobile device than happens on desktop, but the industry doesn't really seem to have moved there. Obviously, we see the dominant factor of Facebook and Google taking pretty much all growth in the ad revenue sector. Facebook reported its earnings figures last night, and there's a lot of debate around fake news, around responsibility on those social platforms, but the roller coaster and the locomotive of their revenue continues to go in only one direction. And there's a little bit of a tension, if you heard the call last night, between meaningful connections and taking responsibility socially for the fake news bubble versus putting more ads into things like Instagram in order to generate revenue. So we've obviously got Facebook on our panel today, so we'll probably have some of that conversation. The other key dynamic, which I've touched on a little bit already, is around trust per se. So trust in advertising, trust in brands. Are they authentic? Do they say what they're going to do? Is the CEO accessible, like the Aston Martin CEO we were seeing? There is an increasing issue in the trust around digital, not just fake news, but actually ads following me around the internet. Margin being created out of ad tech, and I think Americo called it vested interest. So there's an interesting kind of conversation to be had around how is that working today. And we actually saw in the Edelman Trust Barometer last week that there's rising trust in traditional media for the first time in 10 years and in journalism. That jumped by 5 percentage points, whereas the trust in platforms dropped by 2 percentage points. So a lot of questions to be asked, and my job's not to answer them, my job's to moderate today. So I'm going to firstly just introduce you to the esteemed panel, each of whom is going to come up for 15 minutes and give you their perspective on the future media mix. And then we're going to come together for a discussion around all of those topics. So first up, we will have Kathy Dykman, Director of Marketing Sciences from Facebook for Northern Europe. Kathy's had an illustrious career in complex research, and her presentation will be all around brand growth through incrementality. We then have Alex Payne, who's the Director of Influence Room, which has a unique approach to influencers, connecting brands through a private members platform. But Alex also has another interesting role in that he's a broadcaster. He actually hosts rugby union on Sky Sports. So I have a very interesting view on the changing world of broadcast. And we've talked about TV is actually starting to drop some of its revenue. It's moving to digital, so how that's going to play out. And lastly, Kate Cox represents the marketer community. She's the CMO of GoDaddy at a EMEA level. A business that today has 17 million customers. Kate has both written and taught courses for the IPA and others on strategy and building brands. So a really interesting kind of collection of people to talk to you about their view of the future media mix. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Kathy up, who's going to start.